Amanda didn't hear the words. She felt them. She was standing 15 feet away, adjusting a centerpiece near the east wall of the ballroom, when Ryu's voice carried just far enough over the low hum of conversation. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The words landed with the quiet precision of something thrown by someone who didn't care where it hit. A woman like that is a distraction. Not a wife. Not for me. Not for anyone serious in this room. She finished adjusting the flowers. She straightened the card beside the vase. She touched her earpiece and told her assistant to redirect the catering staff to the east corridor. And then she moved to the next table, the next arrangement, the next task, because she had a job to finish, and she was not the kind of woman who let a man's words stop her from finishing it. But she had heard every syllable. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel right now. Like this video and drop a comment below. We're just getting started, and you do not want to miss what happens next. The man who had said it was Kang Jae-hyun. Anyone in Seoul's inner circles knew the name. Head of the Kang organization. 34 years old. The kind of power that didn't announce itself because it didn't have to. He had arrived last that night, as powerful men always do, and the entire room had quietly rearranged itself around his presence. Amanda had noticed him the moment he walked in. Not because she was impressed, but because she made it her business to know exactly who was in any room she was responsible for. She had also noticed that he noticed her. For seconds, maybe 5, his gaze had moved across her the way it moved across everything else in the room. Calculating, cataloging, moving on. She had thought nothing of it, until Ryu made his joke and Jae-hyun answered it like a verdict. Park Sungho had been standing 2 steps to the right of Jae-hyun when it happened. He hadn't laughed. While the other men around the bar chuckled and moved on to the next conversation, Sungho had stayed quiet. His eyes had found Amanda across the ballroom. He had watched her absorb the words without flinching, and something in his chest had shifted in a way he didn't immediately have a name for. The gala ended at midnight. Amanda completed her final walkthrough, signed off on the vendor sheets, and collected her coordinator's bag from the back room. Ryu handed her the payment envelope without looking up from his phone. She took it, thanked him professionally, and walked toward the exit. Jae-hyun was in the corridor. He was on his way out, phone pressed to his ear, 2 members of his security detail trailing behind him. He passed her in the narrow hallway without slowing down. He didn't look at her. He didn't acknowledge her. He moved through the space she occupied as though she were part of the architecture. Amanda watched him go. She stood in that corridor for exactly 3 seconds. Not because she was wounded, but because she was memorizing the shape of his indifference, so she would never mistake anything less for anything more. Then she turned, walked in the opposite direction, and didn't look back. Sungho was standing at the far end of the corridor. He had seen everything. 3 weeks passed. Amanda's event planning firm picked up 2 new clients. She worked late most nights, ate lunch at her desk, and did not think about the gala any more than it deserved, which was not at all. She was sitting across from a potential client at a coffee shop in Mapo when she heard the chair across from her pull-out. She looked up, expecting her 11 o'clock. It was Sungho. He sat down without being invited, but not with arrogance. More like a man who understood that the situation required a directness that waiting in line didn't allow. He was dressed simply. No entourage. He set nothing on the table, made no show of his position or his name. He just looked at her and said, "I owe you an apology for something I didn't say." Amanda studied him. "Excuse me. 3 weeks ago. The gala." He held her gaze evenly. "I was standing there when my associate made that remark. I didn't say anything to correct it. That was wrong, and I wanted to tell you that in person." Amanda was quiet for a moment. She tilted her head slightly, not softening, not hardening, just measuring. "You tracked me down to apologize for something someone else said. For something I watched happen without stopping it," he said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long time. He didn't fill the silence with more words, which she noted. Men who were performing usually couldn't survive silence. He just waited, and his waiting was patient rather than pressured. "Apology noted," she said finally. "Thank you." He paused. Then, "I'd like to take you to dinner, if you're open to it." Amanda raised an eyebrow. That's a very fast follow-up to an apology. The corner of his mouth lifted. I found that waiting tends to look like hesitation. I'm not hesitating. She looked at him one more time, at the steadiness in his eyes, the absence of theater in his posture, and made a decision that surprised even her. Friday, she said, 7 o'clock. You picked a place. Somewhere quiet. He nodded. He stood. He didn't linger or oversell it. He simply said, Friday, and walked out. Amanda watched him leave. Then she looked back down at her notes, pressed her pen to the page, and told herself it was just dinner. It was not just dinner. The restaurant Sungho chose was small, expensive in the quiet way, the kind of place that didn't need a reputation because it had regulars. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, and Amanda noticed within the first 10 minutes that Sungho asked questions the way intelligent people did, not to fill space, but because he actually wanted the answers. He asked about her work, not the surface version, not how long have you been doing this and do you enjoy it, but the real version. How did she rent a room? How did she decide what a space needed before the client even knew what they wanted? Amanda found herself answering fully, without editing herself down, which was unusual. She talked about the instinct behind event architecture, the way power moved through a room, depending on where you placed the focal points, the way she could walk into any space and tell within 60 seconds who was performing and who was actually comfortable. Sungho listened without interrupting. Then he said, That's how you ended up in our world, isn't it? You're not intimidated by power because you understand it structurally. Amanda paused. That's a very precise read. I pay attention, he said simply. She looked at him. So does your boss. Differently. The name sat between them for a moment. Sungho didn't deflect it. Jae-hyun sees everything as a variable, he said. Something to control, leverage, or eliminate. He's very good at it. A pause. He's not always good at knowing the difference between a variable and a person. Amanda said nothing, but she heard everything. By the end of dinner, she had laughed 3 times. Not politely. Actually laughed, the kind that caught her by surprise. Sungho had a dry wit that he deployed without warning and never oversold. When he held her hand briefly on the walkout, she didn't pull away. When he asked if she was free the following week, she said yes before she finished the thought. Kang Jae-hyun found out on a Tuesday. Ryu mentioned it in passing during a briefing. Sungho had been seen with a woman twice now. Same woman, someone from outside their world. A description. Jae-hyun's pen stopped moving on the page for exactly 1 second. Then it continued. That's his business, he said. Of course, Ryu said, and moved on to the next item. That night, Jae-hyun poured 2 fingers of whiskey and sat at the window of his penthouse and didn't drink it. He kept seeing her at that table, adjusting flowers, absorbing his words without a single crack in her expression. He kept thinking about the corridor, how she had watched him leave and then turn in the opposite direction with such finality that it had felt, for one disorienting moment, like she was the one doing the dismissing. He told himself it meant nothing. He poured the whiskey down the sink and went to bed. If this story is pulling you in, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because the best part is still coming and you're going to be here for it. The dinner party was Jae-hyun's tradition, 12 men, his private dining room, no outsiders. Sungho had called him 2 days before and said, quietly, I'm bringing Amanda. Not asking, informing. The way you inform someone when you've already made the decision and you're offering them the courtesy of advance notice. Jae-hyun had said, fine. She walked in on Sungho's arm, and the room did what rooms always did when someone unexpected entered a space that had its own established gravity. It paused. Not long, not obviously, but Amanda had spent her career reading rooms, and she felt it. She lifted her chin a half degree and kept moving. She greeted each person at the table with quiet confidence, unhurried, unintimidated. When she reached Jae-hyun at the head of the table, she extended her hand the way professionals do, clean, direct, no performance attached to it. Ms. Amanda, Mr. Kong. His hand was steady. So was hers. They held the handshake exactly 1 second longer than necessary, and in that second, an entire conversation happened without a single additional word. Dinner was long. The food was excellent. The conversation around the table moved through business, through territory, through the careful architecture of men who spoke in implication more than statement. Amanda held her own without inserting herself. She answered what was directed at her. She asked one question, of the man to Sungho's left, that was so precisely targeted that it reframed an entire topic, and two of the men looked at her with undisguised respect. Jae-hyun watched all of it. He watched Sungho top off her glass before she had to ask. He watched her tilt her head when she found something genuinely interesting, a small unconscious tell that meant she had stopped performing and started actually engaging. He watched the way she touched Sungho's wrist lightly when she laughed. Not possessive, just present, and he felt something tighten behind his sternum that he had no business feeling. He had told a room full of men that she wasn't worth marrying. He had said it without a second thought, because he was Kang Jae-hyun, and the things he said became the temperature of whatever room he was in. He had said it and moved on. He was not moving on. Amanda excused herself from the table midway through the second course. Jae-hyun waited a beat, then another. Then he stood, not to follow her, he told himself, just to retrieve something from his study. He believed himself right up until the moment he stepped into the hallway and found her standing in the open doorway of the study, looking at the shelves with calm, open curiosity. She heard him and turned. Neither of them pretended surprise. The silence in that room was a different species from the silence at the dinner table. It had weight, texture. It was the silence of two people standing inside an unfinished sentence. Jae-hyun spoke first. "You do good work." His voice was level, careful. It was the closest thing to an opening that a man like him could construct. Amanda looked at him for a moment. Then, "I know." She walked past him through the doorway. He didn't move to stop her. He stood in the entrance of his own study and listened to her heels on the corridor floor, growing quieter and then returning to the murmur of the dining room. He stood there long after the sound was gone. Sungho found him at the window after the guests had gone. The staff had cleared. The penthouse was quiet in the way it got when the performance of an evening wound down and left only what was real. "She's remarkable," Sungho said. Not provoking, just stating. Jae-hyun turned from the window. "She handled the room well." "That's not what I said." The two men looked at each other. 20 years of friendship lived between them, the kind built in rooms that didn't appear in any public record, across decisions that couldn't be undone. They had never needed to say everything. They had never needed to say anything twice. "Did you mean it?" Sungho asked. "What you said at the gala." Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's yours, Sungho. I'm not in this conversation." Sungho tilted his head. The same small gesture Amanda made when she stopped performing and started listening. Jae-hyun noticed the resemblance and felt something twist in his chest. "That's not what I asked," Sungho said quietly. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He didn't push further. He didn't need to. He had been asking his best friend a question for years, in different rooms, about different things, and he had learned to recognize when the answer was already visible in the silence. He walked to the door. "Good night, Jae-hyun." Jae-hyun said nothing. The door closed. He stood in his own living room and understood, with the particular clarity that comes only after it's too late, that the most costly thing he had ever done in his life had not been a war or a decision or a contract. It had been a sentence, delivered casually, in front of people who laughed and forgot it, to a woman who heard it and didn't forget, but didn't let it stop her either. That was the part that undid him. Not her pain, her indifference to his opinion of her worth. She had simply kept moving, and somewhere in that motion, she had moved completely out of his reach. Sungho chose a private restaurant for the proposal. No performance, no audience. Just a table by the window, her hand across the white cloth, and the truth. "I need you to know something," he said. "That night at the gala, when I watched you absorb what was said and still finish that event without missing a single detail, I saw something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Someone who couldn't be reduced." He looked at her steadily. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left in this world without that beside me. I know what my life is. I know what I'm asking you to walk into. I'm asking anyway, because you're the kind of woman who deserves to be asked, not assumed, not dismissed, not decided for." He opened the box on the table. "Marry me, Amanda." Amanda looked at the ring. Then she looked at him, at his face, which had been honest with her from the first night, which had never tried to impress her more than it tried to actually see her, and she felt the specific warmth of being chosen by someone who had bothered to understand what they were choosing. Yes, she said, not slowly, not dramatically, just clearly, the way she said everything that mattered. He exhaled. She laughed. He slid the ring onto her finger and brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles. And she let him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything more because there was nothing left to negotiate. Sungho called Jae-hyun from the car. 1 ring. 2. Then Jae-hyun's voice, steady as always. Sungho, I propose tonight. A pause. She said yes. The silence on the other end was not empty. It was full of everything Jae-hyun would not say, and both of them knew it. Congratulations, he said finally. His voice was clean, controlled. The voice of a man who had decided exactly how much of himself to show. Jae-hyun. A pause. I know. The call ended. Sungho sat in the car for a moment. Then he went back inside to his fiancée. Jae-hyun sat in his car in the dark. He had driven here without deciding to, on autopilot, the way the body goes to the places the mind won't admit it wants. He was parked across the street from the restaurant. Through the warm glass of the window, he could see their table. Amanda, her elbow on the cloth, leaning forward slightly, saying something that made Sungho laugh. Her ring caught the candlelight. Sungho reached across the table and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. Simple, easy, the gesture of a man who already understood her rhythms. Jae-hyun watched for exactly 1 moment. Then he started the car and drove away and did not look in the mirror. The wedding was 6 months later. Jae-hyun stood at the altar in the position the last 20 years demanded. Right-hand side, best man, the place of honor that a friendship like theirs had long since earned. He stood with his hands clasped, his face composed, wearing the expression he had perfected over a lifetime of rooms that required more from him than he was willing to give. The doors opened. Amanda walked toward them in white. She did not look at Jae-hyun, not with coldness, not with triumph. She simply walked toward the man who had seen her value on the same night someone else announced she had none, and the direction of her gaze made every unspoken thing finally, completely, permanently clear. Jae-hyun kept his face still. He held the ring when Sungho asked for it. He placed it in his best friend's hand. He heard the vows exchanged. Honest words, undecorated, full of the particular courage of 2 people who had chosen each other with full information and no illusions. When the officiant said you may kiss your bride, Jae-hyun looked at a point slightly past the altar. His jaw was tight for exactly 3 seconds. Then it released. The hall broke into applause. Sungho kissed his wife. Amanda laughed against his mouth. They turned to face the room, and she was radiant. Not for the room, not for the occasion, but for the simple reason that the life she was walking into was one she had chosen freely, with both eyes open, without requiring anyone's permission or validation. Kang Jae-hyun applauded with everyone else, because that is what 20 years demands, and because he was not a man who performed grief. He had made his decision the night. He opened his mouth at a bar in front of men who laughed and forgot. He had made it again in the corridor when he walked past her without slowing down. He had made it again in his study when she said, "I know," and walked away, and he stood in the doorway and did not reach for her. Some mistakes don't give you a second act. Some words, once spoken, become the shape of your life. He had been right about one thing. She was a distraction. She distracted him from his arrogance long enough to show him exactly what it had cost. And the price, it turned out, was everything. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel right now, like this video, and drop a comment telling us, was Jae-hyun's silence at the end strength or cowardice? We read every single one. See you in the next story.